Good evening and welcome. My name is Jerry McDermott. I'm the Media and Communications Manager here at Fingal County Council, and I will be your host for tonight's webinar, which is part of the process that will ultimately lead to the creation of the Fingal Development Plan for 2023 to 2029. I have my fingers crossed that we will not experience any technical issues over the next hour, but if we do, please bear with us as we endeavour to resolve them. Now, just over a year ago, on March the 12th, 2021, the development plan process commenced with the publication of the Strategic Issues paper. 12 months on, and we are now out to public consultation on the draft development plan. And as you can see from the timeline there, we're about halfway through the process. The point we're at the moment is circled in red. This is the second of three opportunities that the public gets during the two-year process to have an input into the development plan. And the purpose of this webinar is to allow members of the planning team explain the plan to you and answer any questions that you might have on it. At this point, I want to stress that this will not be the only opportunity for members of the public to engage with our planning team in relation to the draft development plan. As you can see on screen, during the month of April, there will be 4 drop-in events in Swords, Blanchardstown, Malahide and Balbriggan, where you can meet and talk to the planning team. The planning team will be available between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. at each venue, so drop in whenever suits you and drop into whatever centre is most suitable for you. You also have the opportunity to email queries into fingal.developmentplan@fingal.ie, and of course submissions can be made up until May the 12th on Fingal County Council's consultation portal, which is www.consult.fingal.ie. There is also further information on the development plan process on our website, which is fingal.ie/development plan. And once again, as you can see on screen, if you have any queries, they can be emailed to fingal.developmentplan@fingal.ie. Now, let's get things underway this evening. Tonight, we have 2 guests with us. Roisin Burke is a senior planner with Fingal County Council and is leading the development plan team, while Patricia Cadigan is a senior executive planner and also a member of the development plan team. Both are available this evening to answer your questions, so if you have a question, please use the Q&A function, which you'll find at the top of your screen. There you can type in your question and then submit it for answering. Hopefully we'll be able to get through all your questions between now and 8 o'clock. And if you don't still have an opportunity, and you also still have an opportunity to meet the planning team at one of the 4 drop-in events I spoke to about earlier. And of course, you can always send an email to fingal.developmentplan@fingal.ie. Now, I'd like to ask Roisin Burke to formally welcome you to this evening's webinar, and after that we'll then proceed to her presentation, which is going to give you an overview of the draft development plan and the strategic issues facing Fingal. The question and answer session will follow Roisin's presentation, so remember, if you want to pose a question, use the Q&A function on your screen. Roisin, it's over to you.
Good evening, everyone. As Jerry outlined, my name is Roisin Burke. I'm a senior planner in Fingal County Council on the development plan team, and I'm here today to talk about our draft development plan, which is currently on display. I want to begin by thanking everyone for taking the time to be here this evening, particularly when it is such a nice evening and the weather is so good. We really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this process. This is your county, and Fingal County Council wants everyone, youth groups, older citizens, businesses, local residents organisations, community groups, everyone to have your say on the county's future. As Jerry outlined, this is the second round of consultation in the preparation of the new development plan for the period 2023 to 2029. And the preparation of a new development plan to guide the county's future development is one of the most important functions of the County Council. And this plan will set out a shared vision to guide future development for the benefit of Fingal and all its citizens. This consultation has once again come at a time of unprecedented challenges arising from the fallout of COVID-19 as we move forward afterwards, Brexit, climate action, and all the things that are going on in the world today. And this next development plan offers an opportunity to respond to these challenges and to build on the success of the significant investment in regeneration seen over the period of the current plan. The draft plan tells a story of where and how we want Fingal to grow. It draws on our historical heritage and uses our skills and expertise to continue sustainable social, environmental and economic growth well into the future, with a focus on creating vibrant and resilient communities. The development plan sets out the spatial framework to guide future development within the county, with a focus on the places we live, the places we work, the places we visit, the places we do business, and how we interact and move between these places while protecting our environment. I'm going to give a brief presentation, an overview of the draft development plan. And I think the first question a lot of people ask about the development plan is, what is it? And put very simply, it's a framework for development for the county for the period 2023 to 2029. The development plan sets the agenda for the development of the local authority area over the 6-year lifespan, and it's a blueprint for physical, economic and social development. The strategic vision of this plan is on the screen here, but it's actually relatively simple. It's for the county to continue to grow in a sustainable way. The plan envisages Fingal as an integrated network of vibrant, successful urban settlements and rural communities, strategic green belts and open countryside, supporting and contributing to the economic development of the county and the Dublin City region. When I say growth, I'm talking about growth in population and people, growth economically and in employment numbers and in the quality of job opportunities, and growth in the amenities that are required to serve this growing population, more social, community and cultural facilities. And when I talk about sustainably, excuse me, I mean developments that are high quality, compact, dense, accessible, permeable, developments which will avail of and improve existing infrastructure that we have and do not impact on the sensitive environment of Fingal. The draft development plan sets out that spatial framework to guide this future development. One of the many objectives of the plan is to embrace healthy placemaking and economic prosperity through building cohesive and sustainable communities where our cultural, natural and built environment is protected. And it's important that Fingal continues to highlight our distinctive assets and we foster a high quality of life for our residents. The plan is underpinned by 4 key cross-cutting themes: climate action, healthy placemaking and sustainable development, social inclusion and high quality design. The consideration and integration of these in every development in the county will ensure the achievement of our vision. The draft development plan outlines a housing supply target of over 16,000 new homes across the county during the lifetime of the plan. This map shows the zoning across the county, and the brown areas represent residential zoning. And these new homes will ideally be really well served by public transport and have excellent pedestrian and cycle links to all the things that we need, such as schools, jobs, open spaces, pitches, playground, shops and healthcare facilities. And when we ask, or when we think about where this growth will take place, it's generally within the existing built up areas. So across Dublin 15 in areas like Kellystown and Barnhill, where there are existing local area plans, and the continuation of the building out of Hansfield. And development will take place in the towns across the county: Swords, Balbriggan, Donabate, Malahide, just to name a few. Some development will also take place in our rural villages. It's really important they retain their vitality and viability with an appropriate level of development and the provision of essential services. It's really important that this growth takes place in the right place, making sure there is a balance between social, economic and environmental factors. We also must continue to think beyond 2029. The long-term strategic land banks at Lisenhall and Swords and Dunsink and Dublin 15 are earmarked for this. We know these land banks will require individual plans and acknowledge that they will be developed over a number of development plan cycles. In relation to economic development and prosperity, the draft plan emphasises the importance of the right development in the right location. In relation to economic growth across the county, we have focused policies and objectives on our main streets and town centres to ensure the vitality and viability of these are maintained and improved. in line with the town centre approach, which is a national guidance. In the wider economic approach, the draft plan seeks to highlight and build upon the advantages of being located in Fingal, the Dublin-Belfast corridor, our proximity to Dublin City and Dublin Airport, the comprehensive transport and utility infrastructure, and the Dublin 15 Enterprise Zone are key attractors to the county. We need to harness what we already have. We have existing local and international employers already located in the county, and we need to build upon this. We have over 1,400 hectares of undeveloped employment generating zoned land, and it's important that all development for this is located to these areas. This development plan sets out the spatial framework to guide this future development within the county. Key elements of the plan include climate action and how it is integral to every development in the county as we become a healthier, greener county. For us, it's key that as we create more active travel links, that people will make the choice to walk and to cycle because it's the safest and most convenient way to travel, and that builds into that climate action piece. So all these pieces, all the policies are integrated throughout. Also the improvement of amenity and public realm and recreational facilities, the protection of green spaces, biodiversity rich areas from development. We have a new approach to car parking standards and support for tourism initiatives and support for key infrastructure. Before I wrap up, it's essential to say that your input at this stage of the development plan is essential. This plan sets a framework for building cohesive and sustainable communities, and we can only do this through meaningful engagement and consultation with the community. This will ensure a robust development plan which results in inclusive, coherent and consistent planning across the county. Thank you. Jerry, I'll pass it back over to yourself.
Thank you very much indeed, Roisin, and thank you for that comprehensive presentation. And it leaves us with plenty of time to get into questions. We're here until 8 o'clock, so we've got about 45 minutes to take your questions. So do use the Q&A facility at the top of the screen and send them in to us. We're joined not only by Roisin Burke, but also by Patricia Cadigan, who's Senior Executive Planner with the planning team developing the Fingal Development Plan. And I suppose, Patricia, first of all, you're very welcome. And I want to kick off with you and the first question, which has come in from one of our viewers. And what they want to know is when will the draft plan be finally adopted and how long will it last? And also they want to know who makes the plan. Is it just the planners who write it?
Hi, Jerry, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, thank you for the question. I suppose the development plan is the main spatial policy document for the county, as Roisin would have touched on there, and sets out the main policies and objectives for the use and development of land within Fingal over a 6-year period. The making of the development plan is a reserve function, in fact, so it's for the elected members of Fingal County Council to make the plan. It's a very important document, as Roisin would have said as well, and steers development, investment policies objectives over the life of the plan, and in relation to development management as well. So it's a very important document that is made by the elected members.
And of course, the elected members left no stone unturned, because I think there was 11 meetings that they had to consider motions that resulted out of the Chief Executive's draft plan.
That's right. Absolutely. We had a significant number of meetings in recently in the Grand Hotel in Malahide. So again, those would have been televised. So yes, absolutely significant and very detailed involvement from the members. Yeah.
Okay, and yes, Roisin.
You know, that Patricia is highlighting the importance of the members' contribution. So what has happened through this development plan process is we, the executive and the people that work in Fingal County, have produced a plan in relation to how we feel it should develop, and we brought it to the local elected members and had, as you say, 11 meetings of very robust debate on how it should be included. And what's published now is this draft plan. So the one voice that's missing at this stage is that of the public. So that's what we're here this evening to deal with any queries that anybody may have and to get their feedback. So it's very important that people are aware. They have an opportunity now to feed into what they feel works within the plan, what they feel doesn't, and any other queries they may have about it.
Okay, and talking of queries, there's plenty of queries coming in, and I have a question here for you, Roisin. If land is zoned HA, high amenity, in the draft development plan, can landowners get that zoning changed to allow development? And how do they do this? And can the general public respond to any submission made?
Yes, is the short answer to that. This draft plan consultation period allows anyone to make any particular comment on the development plan. So as rezoning request would be a very usual comment. So someone could put in a submission to request a rezoning from high amenity to another zoning class, whether that is residential, for example, or GE, which would be general employment. We then, as the planners, would consider is that an appropriate change in the context of the proper planning and sustainable development of Fingal. In terms of people just do that through the submission, so submissions can be received via the consult website or in writing sent to our Swords office. And then all those submissions are published. I think you mentioned that. So they are all available and will be available for inspection by members of the public. Okay,
thank you, Roisin. Patricia, can I turn to you with this next question? The issue of build-to-rent apartments has been in the news a lot lately. What does the draft development plan have to say about this issue?
Thanks, Jerry. Yes, it has. In fact, I suppose that the plan acknowledges that it does provide a tenure option in the housing market and recognises that in the policies and objectives in Chapter 3. I suppose it's important to note that, as with any type of development, it's important that one type does not dominate, and to that effect, then it's important that such developments are provided in appropriate locations, and such locations could perhaps be close to high quality public transport nodes and town and close to town and city centres. So it's important again that it doesn't dominate as one particular tenure, but it does have a role to play in the housing market and the tenure options as well.
Okay, I hope that clarifies the question for the person who sent that one in. Roisin Burke, what are the plans for Swords Main Street and Swords Castle?
There's lots of plans for Swords Main Street and Swords Castle. Now they're actually outside the development plan process, but it's something myself and Patricia are also actively involved in. So while it's not particularly relevant to this, I'm quite happy to explain. At the moment, we're working on a project called Sustainable Swords, and we're in the middle of drafting a strategy of a placemaking strategy, a public realm strategy for the main street. And so that member of the public should be aware we expect to run another consultation, and I'm sure we'll be back speaking in another webinar in the month of May about that, and that'll include very detailed proposals for the main streets and the areas around Swords.
Thank you very much indeed. It certainly seems to be a very exciting project, and as you say, there will be more about that later. Roisin, there's significant development taking place in Lusk, and builders are getting planning permission for every single bit of green space. There's terrible public transport, no infrastructure, and more housing. How is development being managed there?
I suppose there's a lot of issues coming up in that particular question, Jerry. Yes, there is development going on in Lusk, and every application for development is assessed on the basis of proper planning and sustainable development for the area. So every application, for example, for a number of housing units would be assessed and would be obliged to provide green space and open space for the residents and contribute to the larger open space requirements for the town. Public infrastructure or public transport is something we work closely with the NTA and the TAI about the provision of that, and we seek to locate development along public transport corridors. That's a key aim of this development plan and wouldn't be limited to Lusk. In Lusk, for example, one of the things that we have mapped is the improvement of cycle and pedestrian routes to the train station, which we feel would very much help alleviate the situation there. And we're also working with the NTA in terms of bus connects and other connections to the town. I mean, when we look at the town of Lusk and we look at the zoning within it, there's been very little rezoning, but we're open to comment, and we'd like people to come back and tell us how they feel for example, could be improved, what kind of developments are missing, or where they think we could provide facilities which are missing, and we'd be quite happy to work with those.
Okay, thank you, Roisin. Patricia, question here for you. There's an old building in my area, but I think should be protected. Can I make a submission about it to the draft plan?
Thanks, Jerry. Yes, is the answer. The addition and indeed deletion from the record of protected structures is a separate process. But if the viewer wishes to make a submission to have a building included that isn't there, by all means, please include that in the submission, and perhaps include a map as well, or just something to locate the property, and we will bring it to the attention of our conservation officer. So absolutely, yes, that can be done as part of this process.
Okay, just another question. We're getting quite a few questions in about a halting site at Dubber Cross, and it's you know that it's mentioned in the development plan and that. I'm just wondering if there's anything you can enlighten people about, because it's coming up in a number of different questions.
I suppose, Jerry, part of the development plan appendices is the housing strategy, and that looks at the provision of traveller accommodation, as well as other specialist accommodations such as housing for the elderly and such. We have outlined existing traveller accommodation sites and proposed new ones. This is a new one, and we're open to consideration as to where if it's not appropriately located here, where it could be appropriately located.
So I suppose the thing you want from people is if they do have opinions on something in the development plan, they have an opportunity to make a submission at consult.fingal.ie.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Yes, and of course I will mention, of course, the drop-in centres. We'll have 4 drop-in events during the course of this development plan consultation next month in April. 4 different venues in Swords, in Blanchardstown, in Balbriggan, and also in Malahide. And there's an opportunity there for people to come along and talk things through with members of the planning team. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. We'll be available. There'll be 6 or 8 members of the planning team available, and we'll be quite happy to discuss individual issues or wider issues as well. It's not limited to that, and we'll be available for those drop-in sessions 4 to 8.
That's right, 4 to 8, and you can drop in whatever time suits you. Patricia, one of the viewers here, question is as follows. I'm from the countryside. How can I qualify to build a house in the countryside? Is there any change in this plan compared to the last one in relation to this issue?
Thanks, Jerry. Yes, there's actually national guidelines in relation to sustainable rural housing, and they date back to 2005. So the department has indicated that it's currently in the process of reviewing those guidelines at the moment, and we, as well as other local authorities, are awaiting the outcome of those before we do a full review of our housing policy. But just in response to that question, Chapter 3 of the plan will give detailed breakdown in relation to the policies and objectives that need to be followed in terms of an applicant making an application for a rural dwelling. So again, I would point them to that and to the development management section as well.
Okay, myself and Roisin were just talking before Patricia came in with that answer about submissions, and that's prompted a question from one of our viewers wondering, is there a certain type of observation on the draft development plan that would be most useful to the council? Roisin?
Well, I suppose I would prefer a positive one, but at this stage, we welcome any observation. For us, it's really important that members of the public get involved and tell us. We've put our best foot forward in drafting this plan, and we really want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly about it. What people feel will work, what they feel won't work, what they feel is missing, and what they feel should be supported. So any type of submission, and you know, it's just very simple. They can upload them to consult.ie or put it in the post. There's no need for fancy letters or anything. Simple language and just outlining what you feel works in your community, what doesn't work in your community, and how you would like things to be improved.
Okay, Patricia, I have a couple of questions for you in relation to biodiversity. The first one is that you mentioned biodiversity-rich areas would be protected. Does this mean hedgerows will be protected and preserved if there is proposed developments?
Thanks, Jerry. It's a very important part of, I suppose, of our ecological corridors, and we refer to stepping stones as well in chapter 9, I think. So absolutely, they form an integral part of our green infrastructure. So I think as part of an application coming in, it would need to be very clear if a hedgerow can be preserved, and we have numerous policies and objectives in the plan to safeguard and protect hedgerows as part of developments. And also to, again, coming back to what Roisin would have said earlier, you know, the importance of our local environments now, and the impact of COVID, and people getting more familiar with their local environments, and the importance of the natural environment as well would come to the fore. So yes, they would be, you know, would try absolutely to be protected as part of schemes.
And another question just in relation to biodiversity, and it's about the Fingal Biodiversity Action Plan. And one viewer wants to know, when will the Fingal Biodiversity Action Plan be completed, and how will the Biodiversity Action Plan influence the development plan?
I suppose, Jerry, we work very closely with our colleagues. So Hans Visser is our biodiversity officer, and I understand the draft biodiversity plan is to present it at the next SPC of the planning committee, which I think is due to take place at the end of April. Now I'm not quite sure of the dates, but once it takes place at that meeting, it will be published and be out for consultation again. We interlink with Hans and our colleagues across the county. We interlink with our colleagues in active travel, our colleagues in transportation. So the draft plan itself is complementary and integrated with the policies of the other documents across the county.
And how will the development plan help to upgrade and improve areas with high antisocial behaviour?
I suppose, Jerry, there's a number of specific policies and objectives within the plan that we would hope would help that. So one of the key things that influences and impacts antisocial behaviour is passive surveillance and permeability. So the development plan contains a chapter outlining what we call development management standards, which are the standards that should be applied to any application that comes in for planning permission. And what this seeks to do is ensure permeability, so that there's no dead ends, there's no areas without passive surveillance. So that in itself creates an awareness of people around the streets, and it limits antisocial behaviour. So all those things are good planning theory. So that's about that permeability between sites, between open spaces, across roads, and that passive surveillance. And another way we try to do that is to have that mix of housing types and housing sizes across developments, because we find where you have a mix of housing sizes, for a better way of putting it, across developments, and you have a wider range of people living there, as in a wider age range. And when you have a wider age range, you have people there at different times of the day. And that in itself leads to safer communities, because you have eyes on the street. You know, it's not that everybody leaves at 9 o'clock in the morning and nobody comes back to 5. So by having smaller units, and among family units, you might have older people living there that are around. So things like that all contribute to eliminating or moving towards less antisocial behaviour, and those policies are peppered throughout the plan.
Do you think we've learned from the mistakes of the past?
Oh, very much so. I mean, at one time we were very much designing our estates and our towns around the use of the private car, for example, and those days are gone. What we're looking at, it's not that we're eliminating the use of the car, nobody is saying that, but we're giving the pedestrian the precedence on the street. So it's their safety is so important. So things like that continue to evolve.
Right, and I just want to have you, Roisin. Another question that came in here, you might be the best person to answer this one, is the viewer wants to know, what are the plans for the derelict Main Street in Rush? And I assume they're from Rush because they say we've been waiting over a decade for it to be sorted out. Yes,
I know the site in question myself. I think it was granted permission in 2010 or 11, a long time ago. There's a number of There's a number of routes that we're going down to deal with that particular area in terms of the Derelict Sites Act and the Vacant Sites Act. So they are subject to a different process, and we are trying to get them cleaned up and get them back in use. And that in itself is a policy of the plan. You know, we're very lucky in Fingal. We have a number of towns and villages very established with really pretty and really established main streets, and it's so important that we use those that existing built up area, that we you know, avail of brownfield sites in the existing towns and village centres and bring them back to life and have that vitality and viability back in the main street. Unfortunately, these ones in rush are an eyesore, but we are working to try and get them back into use.
And would that be the same for other derelict sites across the county?
Yes, we have a derelict site register and we also have a vacant site register. So there are two different legislative processes we go through. So that's something we avail of to try and ensure that there is limited or less dereliction and vacancy in the town and village centres.
Okay, thanks, Roisin. Patricia, recreational hubs appear to have worked in different parts of the county. Does Fingal County Council have intentions to provide these types of facilities across the county? In other words, in areas where they don't have recreational hubs?
Thanks, Jerry. Absolutely, yeah, recreational hubs is something that's been pioneered by Fingal, I guess. So we have a number that have gone through the statutory process and a number that are in the planning process at the moment. So these are very high quality facilities that are multi-use and facilitate a number of different sporting uses. And we try to locate them in proximity to existing settlements, but also close to schools and other facilities like that, where there can be a daytime use and a shared use. So absolutely, this is something that is being rolled out across the county, and we fully recognise and support its importance. It's also in line with Fingal's Keeping It Green strategy, so it is something that is very much promoted in the draft plan. So we'd welcome submissions again in relation to that issue in individual areas.
When you say you'd welcome submissions, is that from people saying we should have one here? Is that the type of submission that you'd be looking for in relation to recreational hubs?
Well, Fingal has done a little bit of work in the past on recreational social facilities audit, and we're hoping to roll that out for the remainder of the county. It would have been completed for Balbriggan, Swords and Rush Lusk. So again, we have an objective in the plan to provide for a similar audit for the rest of the remainder of the county. But absolutely, we'd welcome submissions on foot of that. If people can identify where there's a shortage, or even if there's an oversupply of particular facilities, we'd welcome those submissions.
I don't think you'll get them saying that there's an oversupply, but you never know. You'd never know. You'll take submissions on anything, I suppose. Patricia, Roisin, can I come back to you? Question here: are there any mechanisms in the development plan to ensure that proposals are realised within the 6-year time limit period, rather than remaining as ideas on paper? For example, in Balbriggan, there has been talk for years of major rejuvenation, but little has been realised at this stage.
I think, yeah, it's definitely something that we struggle with every day. We have these very strong policies and objectives, but realising them on the ground can be somewhat difficult. But since the publication of the National Planning Framework in 2018, our development plan now must be aligned with our capital investment programmes, and there's different funding mechanisms available. So it's very much part of it that as we put things in the development plan, they have to be actionable. Now, we do recognise some things are more aspirational or long-term, that things I mentioned are long-term strategic land banks, and that these will be developed over a number of development plan cycles. So it's not that everything within the plan is to be carried out within the 6 years, but it's the building blocks and it's the start of that. And when you look at Balbriggan, you know, and you look at the different projects or strategies that were done, and now we're working on our Balbriggan and the funding and the opportunity that's arising from that. Yes, it is a long slog, but we're getting there and we're doing it right. And part of that is having the right policies and objectives, the right zoning and the right framework for that development.
Of course, and it must be said that the the announcement last year by the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage, Darragh O'Brien, of €25 million in URDF funding for Balbriggan was a major milestone in that project, wasn't it?
Absolutely, it's great to see. It's well deserved in Balbriggan. I worked there as a executive planner for a number of years myself, so I have a soft spot for it. So I'm delighted to see all the work going on. It's a lovely town, and to see other people realise that is great.
Okay, and just while I have you, question just in relation to rural clusters, Roisin. Will there be zoning of rural clusters throughout Fingal to cater for rural residents who cannot get planning permission for one-off housing but wish to remain in their rural area, as opposed to buying a house in a Fingal town or village? And how are these rural clusters chosen?
So we have 37 rural clusters designated in the draft development plan. They are chosen as in they function as they are. They're a cluster of housing units, and within that particular rural cluster zoning, it's somewhat easier to qualify for a rural house than outside that. We are quite happy to consider the provision of new rural clusters if someone wants to make a submission to that effect. There is capacity within the existing rural cluster zoning, and if you're from any rural area in Fingal and can show 10 years in that rural area, you're entitled to build a house in any rural cluster. So again, that's something we would very much welcome a submission on.
Okay. If I can turn to you, Patricia, question from one of our viewers who wants to know, how do we maintain the distinct physical separation between areas such as Lusk and Rush and Loch Shinny?
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, I'm guessing that the viewers perhaps talking about green belts and the preservation of green belts. So this is something that's acknowledged throughout the plan, and absolutely, we've included numerous policies and objectives in relation to preserving green belts between existing settlements. They're important for a number of reasons. Number one being to avoid the coalescence of existing settlements, but also to allow the continuation of agriculture where it's present in the area, but also to allow for residents of such communities to avail of access to the countryside. So it's something that's very important, and it's acknowledged throughout the plan in numerous different policies and objectives.
Thanks. Roisin, back to you. Why is it that An Bord Pleanála can grant planning permission for housing estates and not Fingal County Council?
Well, we can both grant permission for housing estates, I suppose. But I assume the person is referring to is some of the strategic housing development where the board in the last number of years had a slightly different role than they ever had previously, and applications of 100 or more units were made directly to the board. That legislation has now expired, and large-scale residential developments are back to be dealt with by the local authority. So all applications that come in for this type of development will be assessed against the policies and objectives of the development plan. So it's very important that those policies and objectives and the zonings are robust and they're cohesive, and they make sure for a consistent approach to development across the county.
And just one more for you, Roisin. Is it intended to keep the area north of Applewood, beyond the Broadmeadow River in Swords, zoned as green space, or will the eventual development of Metro North, or Metrolink as it's now known, change this zoning?
No, the area, sorry, I'm just to make sure that I'm in the right area. The area north of Apple, there's two zonings around there. So there is an open space zoning that goes along the Broadmeadow River, and that's part of our proposal to create a green necklace of open spaces around Swords. But the area north of that, we call it Lisson Hall, is zoned for a new urban neighbourhood, and that will take advantage of Metrolink coming there. That'll be at the end point of Metrolink, and we foresee that to be one of our long-term housing developments and create a new urban neighbourhood there. That's currently zoned as such in the current development plan. So for the listener, there hasn't been a change of zoning in that area.
Okay, I hope that clarifies it for the viewer. Patricia, while the development plan is good in theory, how can local communities make sure that it is actioned and that the necessary infrastructure is in place before large housing schemes are developed?
Thanks, Jerry. Yes, this is a question that comes up quite a bit. I suppose in our land use plans, we would be very careful to ensure that the provision of housing and is provided in tandem with other facilities, including schools, healthcare, childcare, and other facilities like that. I suppose we work and have worked and continue to work with all stakeholders, including the Department of Education, in terms of identifying various locations for schools, and we would work with them through the local area plan and framework plan process in relation to that. So I suppose really it would revert back to policies and objectives in the local area plan that would be taken into consideration in considering applications for development and what type of other facilities would need to be provided. I suppose just one thing to point out that under the current in the draft plan, there is a new policy to seek a social infrastructure audit as part of larger applications for large scale housing. So the developer would be required to identify such facilities within the area. So we feel this is a positive change.
Okay, and just one more for you, Patricia. Can I put a submission into the draft plan requesting new street lights on a specific street in Lusk? Is this type of topic valid for a submission to the draft development plan?
Yes, that can be made. It's probably something that could be addressed to our lighting section as well, or our operations department, possibly to follow up on in the shorter term. But if there are issues arising from a lack of lighting or surveillance or issues like that within particular areas, certainly that could be raised. But also if they wish to write directly to the council, to the lighting section or operations, that would be pursued as well.
Okay, I'll hold you there because we're getting a lot of questions on Lusk, and another question here is Lusk is missing any amenities for children of all ages. So how is Fingal developing amenities for different age groups in Lusk and indeed in other areas?
It probably comes back to the earlier question, Jerry, in relation to the social facilities and infrastructure recreational audit, rather, that we have conducted and will conduct for the remainder of the county. It's something that's also come up in our earlier issues paper, and we're cognizant of where there's perceived shortcomings in relation to provision of facilities. So if the viewer wishes to identify exactly what the shortcomings are, we certainly review that as part of the report.
Okay, and those submissions can be made to www.consult.fingal.ie, and we need those submissions in before 23:59 on the 12th of May. So plenty of time to get your submission together. Roisin Burke, I'll come back to you because we have a number of questions looking for the extension of the DART to many areas of Fingal and extensions to existing train stations. So I suppose what the viewers want to know, is there any update on the DART extension?
Yeah, that's a major project. There's consultation ongoing at the moment, and it's proposed that the DART North is extended, the DART is electrified to Balbriggan. Patricia, you might know a bit more about this than me, and DART West is going towards...
That's right.
Somebody dig me out of a hole here, please.
Yeah.
That's right, Roisin. There's the DART West consultation is ongoing, and I understand there's a public webinar on tomorrow, in fact, in relation to a review of the Ashtown proposals, but also DART North, DART Coastal, DART plus Coastal North. I understand public consultation is ongoing in relation to that, and it's open until the 8th of April. But perhaps the viewer might like to look at the DART plus website just to firm up on those dates.
Okay, thank you, Patricia, for clarifying that. And while I have you, Patricia, are Fingal County Council planning to build any more schools in Rush and other areas to cope with the extra housing estates currently being built?
I suppose the answer is that Fingal itself doesn't provide the schools, but I think I would have mentioned we work closely with the Department of Education and Department of Further Education to identify where demand is and as part of local area plans to make provision and set aside land, identify land for schools. In preparing the draft plan, consultation would have occurred with the department, and all of the sites for schools are located on the sheets that are currently on display. So if the viewer wishes to have a look at the Rush map, they will see where the schools are proposed.
Okay, thank you. I just will remind you, we've only got 15 minutes left on this webinar. We finish at 8 o'clock, so if you have any more questions, do keep them coming in. And thank you to everybody who's submitted questions already. It certainly makes my job a lot easier. Roisin Burke, let's turn to you now. And viewer here wanting to know, is it possible to get information on the number of housing units developed in particular areas to enable communities to understand the increase in housing?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of information that's publicly available. One of the easiest forms, and it's published quarterly by the department, is the Housing Task Force returns, and that outlines the number of housing that has been started, that has been completed, and that has been occupied across the 4 Dublin authorities in a quarter. So you can get that by Googling Housing Task Force return. Then also on our website there is access to all the planning information. So any planning application that has come in is scanned and made available. So it's very easy to go on. We have an interactive map, and you can look at the applications and look at the decisions that were made. Also available is the planner's report, and what can be interesting about that is what you get to see in the report is the issues that have been assessed and how they've been dealt with. So for example, if a developer is looking for an application of 50 units, then that planner's report will outline the many bed spaces within that. The many bed spaces impacts on the amount of green open space to be provided, the amount of car parking to be provided, and other things like that. So there's a lot of detailed information available, and it's all publicly available on our website.
And Roisin, would you be able to outline the plans to rezone the 1,700 acres north of the M50 at Dunsink?
I think, Jerry, there's a bit of misinformation in that. So Dunsink is within the M50, so it's south of the M50, and we have rezoned around 163 hectares. So that's just under 400 acres, so not quite the numbers that's suggested in the question. We have rezoned that as part of our strategic land bank. So what we're saying there is this is our future land bank for our future housing. So it's after the 23 to 29 development plan, but what we would like to do during the 23 to 29 period is to carry out a detailed study that would look at a detailed framework for development, where housing would go, where business would go, where schools would go. So it's very much our long-term strategic reserve. It's very much smaller than what is indicated in that particular question, and it's something that again would be done in consultation with the local community. Now, if I've misinterpreted that question, maybe the person would put something else up in the box and I can clarify it.
Yes, and of course they also have the option of sending an email to fingal.developmentplan@fingal.ie, or even if they're in that area in Dublin 15, they can drop into the drop-in event, which will be in Blanchardstown in April, and we'll be giving you the further details on that before the end of this webinar. Patricia, coming to you, there are more and more older people in our county. What does the draft development plan say about looking after them and their needs?
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, it's an area we're very focused on. In particular, in relation to, I suppose the term we're using is right sizing and downsizing as well as another term that's used. We're looking at, in particular, in relation to local area plans and framework plans, and we have a policy to this effect in the draft, to investigate appropriate locations for senior living. And also looking at the possibility of smaller units within town and village centres. So all of this goes goes back to something Roisin touched on earlier in relation to, improving and increasing the vibrancy of these locations, but also giving an alternative for people to downsize from a housing unit that may no longer be suitable. It's a cohort that's growing in Fingal. We're a very young county, but also it's a cohort that is growing, the over 65 category. So it's something we are very, very keen to pursue. And again, I'd maybe direct people to have a look at chapter 3 of the plan, and also the development management standards as well in relation to that.
You mentioned there, Patricia, that older people is a cohort that's growing. Another cohort that's growing within Fingal is those who have taken up sea swimming. And we have a question in relation to that, which you might be able to answer. This viewer says that during COVID, lots of us took up sea swimming. I have noticed that some swimming areas lack facilities. More and more people are using the beaches and swimming spots along the coast. Will facilities such as toilets and changing areas be provided for in the new plan?
That's a good question. Exactly. In our plan, we're looking at, I suppose, promotion of tourism and coastal tourism in particular. So that's something that might address the viewer's question there. While we would look to promote such facilities, and indeed they're needed in numerous locations, we have to be very careful that they don't impact on that. There may be particular designations applicable to the lands in question. So I suppose that's something we need to look at in tandem with that. But it is absolutely acknowledged. It's a pastime and activity that's grown exponentially since COVID.
And is it a bit like when you answered the question in relation to the recreational hubs a while ago? Is it a case that if people can identify areas where it might be suitable for these showers and changing areas to be put in, that they make submissions and alert you to that?
Yes, and similarly, we would have received submissions at the issues paper stage as well. And I suppose Fingal has rolled out a number of improvements in relation to toilet facilities at various bathing spots throughout the county. So it is something we are actively engaged in doing. But by all means, if there's a particular location that the person is interested in, if they want to identify that and send it in as part of their submission.
Okay, thank you. Roisin Burke, there is a need for more Garda stations in many areas of the county. Can the development plan influence their location?
Yes, is the short answer. So within the development plan, we have a number of zonings where facilities such as Garda stations would be permitted. So we would welcome any opportunity or any submission that highlights an appropriate location. The provision of a Garda station would be permitted within any mixed use zoning, and then also within the CI, the community infrastructure zoning. So yes, that's definitely something we'd be quite happy to work with the guards on.
And just one more for you, viewer here. My house is in Blanchardstown. How can I see what type of developments might take place close to my home?
What I would advise that person or any person to do is when you go onto our website, we have an interactive map. So within that, you can check out the zoning. You can type in your address so you can find your house and you can see the zoning, and you can see the zoning of the areas around, and that'll give an indication of what type of development is permitted. So I suppose just to go back a step, when an area is zoned for a type of development, we're basically saying that it's suitable for this type of development. So if it's zoned for residential, we're saying it's okay for housing to go in here. If it's zoned for general employment, we're saying it's okay for office space to go in here. So when you go onto that map, find your house, zoom out and have a look at what's going on around there. And if you have any concerns, that's the type of submission or observation we would like to receive.
And of course, they can go along to the drop-in event in Blanchardstown, which Absolutely. Is, I think it's April the 21st. Between 4 and 8.
We'll have maps. We'll have maps. We will point out where your house is and indicate and show you what's going on around there, and show you what the different zonings and what the implications of each one may or may not mean for your local area.
Okay, thank you, Roisin. Patricia, if I turn back to you now, is there any new zoning in this plan compared to the last plan?
Thanks, Jerry. I suppose the new zoning that we've introduced in this plan is the National Sports Campus. and it's in recognition of the importance that the National Sports Campus in Abbottstown plays. It's a very unique facility within the country, and it's a privilege to have it within our county. So the National Sports Campus objective NSC of the plan will set out those uses which are permitted and not permitted, and again that's contained in chapter 14 of the plan, which the viewer might like to take a look at.
And is there anything interesting in it, or is it sort of really establishing the National Sports Campus as the sort of home of Irish sport?
I think it's a recognition of the importance and the world-class facilities that are present indoor and outdoor, and also the importance that it plays to the local community being able to use such facilities. So it's an affirmation and recognition of its importance to Fingal.
And sort of still on that subject, how is the open space planned for new housing estates, and how much open space should be provided for in each scheme?
Yeah, that's a good question, and again, open space is so important. So there will be two different types of open space: private and public open space. Chapter 3, in terms of placemaking, would deal with the private open space applicable to individual units, based on the number of bedrooms and the type of development. But then, if the viewer wishes to have a look at chapter 4, this will set out the level of public open space that is required in individual schemes, so that sets out clearly what's required in an application.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of our webinar, but we still have a few questions there, so I'm going to try and go through these very quickly. So if you can give me quick answers, if that's possible. Patricia, is there a new approach to car parking standards in the draft plan?
There is a new approach, Jerry, and it's probably following on from successive development plans. So yes, while we're accommodating car parking and car use, I suppose there's an increased emphasis on active travel, and I think the plan is very keen to promote active travel across the county. So yes is the answer, that we will be following up on that. Yeah.
And Patricia, is there a policy in the plan to encourage living above a shop to incentivise landlords to retrofit and use vacant buildings in main streets?
That there is this following on from national legislation as well, national planning legislation, and it's also supported in the draft plan in relation to compact growth, but also the increasing the resilience and vibrancy of town and village centres. So it is something that would be encouraged. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Roisin, a couple of quick ones for you. Should Dublin 15, with a population of over 100,000, have a Lewis Metro link as a priority in the draft development plan? Your microphone, Roisin.
Sorry about that. Going so well. That is the Dart West that Patricia spoke about earlier. Like, the provision of Dart West will allow for increased rail facilities through Dublin 15, which will help with that particular query there.
And we currently have a current development plan, and will there be a review done at the end of the current development plan, and how will that influence the new plan?
So one of the things, we've more or less carried out that review. So the first step in the process of the preparation of the new plan is review the old and set the strategic aims of the new. So that was part of the consultation that we carried out last March. And then once the plan is adopted, 2 years later, we carry out a 2-year review of how it's been implemented.
Okay, final question to Patricia. Do the council have plans for more greenways and cycleways similar to other counties?
Yes, as well as the answer, Jerry, that we would have a list of those greenways and cycle routes that are proposed to be rolled out over the life of the plan, included in chapter 6. So yes, it's something we're actively pursuing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Roisin, would observations on community gardens and farmers markets be welcome?
Absolutely, particularly in terms of locations where they would be suitable or where people could think they could work. We would very much appreciate those.
And is the plan available for people to view at the council offices?
Yes, so the plan, the physical copy of the plan and its supporting documentation and the maps is available in Blanchardstown and Swords, and is available in all the libraries across the county.
And what happens next, Roisin?
What happens next? The plan is on display until the 12th of May. Following that, we will collate all the submissions and we prepare what's known as a Chief Executive's report, where we summarise and respond to all the submissions, and we make recommendations for changes to the plan as a result of the submissions received. We present that Chief Executive's report to the elected members for their consideration. That'll take place in September time. And dependent upon the changes that are put forward, we will go for a third round of consultation, and all things going well, that'll be out on display in November of this year.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Roisin. Unfortunately, the clock has caught up on us and we have run out of time. If your question hasn't been answered, and I think we answered nearly everything, but don't worry, it will be forwarded on to the development plan for consideration. Thank you to everybody who did submit questions or comments, and thank you all for logging in this evening. It was great to see so many people on this webinar. During the month of April, as I said, there will be 4 drop-in events in Swords, Blanchardstown, Malahide and Balbriggan, where you can meet and talk to the planning team in a lot more detail, and you'll also have the opportunity to email queries into fingal.developmentplan@fingal.ie. Don't forget that submissions can be made up to the 12th of May on Fingal County Council's consultation portal, which is www.consult.fingal.ie. And there's also further information on the development plan process on our website, which is fingal.ie/development plan. And you can also download a copy of the development plan from the website. If you want to watch tonight's webinar again, a recording will be available later this week on the development plan website. My thanks to Roisin Burke and Patricia Cadigan for joining us this evening. I hope you, like me, found what they had to say very informative. Until we meet again, goodbye and stay safe.